The city of Neo-Seoul glowed in the deep blue of a winter evening. Snow fell in soft, quiet flakes, covering the streets and buildings in a clean white blanket. High in the sky, between the tall towers, holographic signs shone with bright colors. There were giant wreaths of green light and stars that twinkled in red and gold. The whole city was getting ready for Christmas. On the 112th floor of a tall apartment building, a man named Kim Jun was also getting ready. But his world was much smaller and much quieter. He stood in his living room, looking at a small, real Christmas tree. It was the only thing in the apartment that felt truly warm. The room was very clean, almost too clean, as if not many people lived there. The lights on the tree blinked in a slow, steady pattern, throwing soft colors onto the floor. Jun was a man in his late 30s. His face was kind, but his eyes looked tired, as if he had not slept well for a long time. He held a small, flat box in his hands, wrapped in paper covered with pictures of smiling reindeer. He was trying to put a ribbon on it, but his big fingers were not very good with the thin, shiny material. The only sound was the quiet hum of the heating unit and the soft rustle of the wrapping paper. Then a small voice came from near the window. "Appa, do you think the Santa shuttle can fly in all this snow?" Jun looked up. His daughter Sumin was 7 years old. She had her face pressed against the cold glass of the big window that looked out over the city. Her breath made a small foggy circle on the pane. Jun smiled, a real smile this time that made the tiredness in his eyes fade for a moment. "Of course it can, Sumin-ah," he said. "Santa's shuttle has the best navigational technology in the whole galaxy. A little snow is nothing for him." Sumin turned from the window, her eyes wide with belief. "Better than the Dracani star cruisers?" "Even better," Jun said, his smile tightening just a little at the mention of the Dracani. He focused on tying the ribbon. "Now come here. I need your expert help with this bow. You are much better at this than I am." Sumin skipped over from the window. She was wearing warm, fuzzy pajamas with a pattern of penguins on them. She took the ribbon from her father's hands, her small fingers moving quickly and skillfully. In seconds, she had made a perfect loopy bow. "See, Appa? It's easy." "You are a magician," Jun said, and he meant it. He placed the finished gift under the tree. It was a small pile. There was a new art set, a book about planets, a soft knitted sweater, and now this last one. The special one. A limited edition model kit of a Terran Starlifter, Sumin's favorite spaceship. This was their life now. Just the two of them. Their small traditions. Their quiet Christmas Eve. He would make hot chocolate later. They would watch an old video cartoon about a reindeer. He would read her a story before bed. It was a good life. It was a peaceful life. He had worked very hard to build this peace for them. 3 years ago, it had been different. 3 years ago, there had been another person here. Sumin's mother. His wife, Hyejin. Hyejin had not left them for another man. She had left for something bigger. She was a brilliant diplomat, and she had been offered a chance few humans ever got. To join the diplomatic corps of the Dracani Concordat. The Dracani were a powerful, advanced species. People sometimes called them dragons because of their ancient history and their sharp, intelligent eyes. To work with them was a great honor, but to do it, she had to change. She had to undergo treatments that altered her body, making her stronger, longer-lived, more able to understand the Dracani way of thinking. Her skin gained a slight pearlescent sheen. Her eyes sometimes caught the light in an unusual way. The human news services called her the Dragon Lady. They showed pictures of her in her severe, elegant gray uniform, standing beside tall, scaled aliens. She had chosen that life over this one. Over him. Over Sumin. The pain of it was a cold, heavy stone in Jun's chest. He had tried to understand. He had tried to be supportive. But in the end, she walked out of this apartment and did not come back. For 3 years, there had been only messages on a screen. For 3 years, Jun had been both father and mother to a little girl who asked too many questions he could not answer. He was pulled from his thoughts by a sharp, electronic sound. Bing bong. It was the intercom from the building's main lobby downstairs. Jun frowned. He was not expecting anyone. The delivery bots had all come and gone hours ago. Maybe it was a neighbor who had locked themselves out. He walked over to the wall panel and pressed the button for audio only. He did not turn on the video screen. "Yes," he said. "Who is it?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice spoke. It was a woman's voice. It was smooth and clear like polished metal. It was a voice he knew better than his own, but it sounded different now. It was flatter, more controlled. It was a voice that gave orders to aliens. "Kim Jun," the voice said. "It's Hye-jin. I am downstairs." The world seemed to stop. The quiet hum of the apartment vanished, replaced by a loud ringing in Jun's ears. He felt his hand tighten on the edge of the intercom panel. His knuckles turned white. He could not breathe. "Hye-jin. Here. Now. On Christmas Eve." Sumin looked up from where she was arranging the gifts under the tree. "Appa, who is it?" Jun didn't answer. He was still trying to make his lungs work. He stared at the intercom as if it had bitten him. "Jun," the voice came again. "Did you hear me?" He found his voice, but it was tight and strange. "I heard you." He took a sharp breath. "What do you want?" There was another pause, shorter this time. He could almost feel her impatience, even through the speaker. "It is Christmas Eve," she said, as if this explained everything. "I wish to see my daughter." A hot wave of anger washed over June, melting the shock. See her daughter, now, after all this time? After missing 3 birthdays? After not being here for the nightmares, the first day of school? The questions that broke his heart every night? His first instinct was to shout. To tell her no. To tell her she had lost the right to make such a request. To protect Su-min from the confusion and the certain hurt that would follow when this strange, polished version of her mother inevitably left again. He looked at Su-min. She was watching him, her head tilted, her expression curious and a little worried. She had heard the tension in his voice. He could not do it. He could not be the one to shut the door. He hated Hye-jin in that moment for putting him in this position. For making him choose between his own anger and his daughter's chance, however small, to see her mother. His hand was shaking as he moved it to the keypad. He typed in the entry code that would unlock the main building door and allow her to come up. He did not say another word. He just pressed the button. The intercom light went out. The silence in the apartment was now heavy and thick. The cheerful Christmas lights on the tree seemed to mock him. "Appa?" Su-min asked again, her voice small. "Who is that?" Jun turned to look at his daughter. He forced his face to become calm. He walked over to her and knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. "Su-min, he said, his voice gentle but serious. "Someone is coming to visit. It's Yuriyama." Su-min's eyes went very wide. She looked towards the door, then back at her father. "Yama, really? The one in space?" "Yes," Jun said, his heart aching. "The one in space." He stood up, feeling 1,000 years old. He walked to the apartment's front door and stood in front of it, waiting. He could hear the soft ping of the elevator arriving at their floor. He could hear the quiet swish as the doors slid open. Then, footsteps. Not the quick, noisy steps of a neighbor, not the clunky steps of a delivery bot. These were slow, measured, and precise steps. They sounded like someone who was always in control. The footsteps stopped on the other side of the door. Jun took a deep breath. He reached out and pressed the button to open it. The door slid into the wall with a quiet hiss. And there she was, Hye-jin. She stood in the hallway, illuminated by the warm light from the apartment. She was wearing the Dracani uniform, a sleek gray outfit that seemed to be made of a material that absorbed the light. It was beautiful and cold. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect style. Her skin had the faint, shimmering quality he had seen on the news screens. She looked like a statue. She looked like a stranger. But her face was still the face he had loved. The shape of her eyes, the line of her nose. It was all there, but it was harder, sharper, as if all the softness had been carved away. Her eyes, those familiar brown eyes, now had tiny, glowing flecks of gold in them. They met his, and for a long moment no one spoke. The cold air from the hallway drifted into the warm apartment, making the hairs on Jun's arms stand up. "Jun," she said finally, giving a single slight nod. He just stared, his hand still on the doorframe. The 2 words felt like a formal greeting from an ambassador, not a hello from a wife coming home. He found his voice. It was rough. "Hi, Jin." The door remained open, a rectangle of cold hallway air cutting into the warm apartment. Jun stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe. Hye-jin stood perfectly still on the other side, a statue carved from memory and polished by time and distance. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic blinking of the Christmas tree lights. It was a small movement from behind Jun that broke the spell. Su-min, curious and cautious, peeked out from behind her father's legs. Her small hands clutched the fabric of his pants. She stared at the woman in the hallway with wide, unblinking eyes. Hyejin's posture changed. It was a subtle shift. Her shoulders, which had been set in a rigid formal line, softened almost imperceptibly. Her gaze, which had been locked on June, dropped down to the small face peering out from behind him. The gold flecks in her eyes seemed to catch the light differently. Slowly, with a fluid and precise motion that was both graceful and unnatural, she knelt. The gray material of her uniform made a soft whisper against the floor. She was now at Sumin's eye level. "Hello, Sumin," she said. Her voice was different now. It was not the polished steel of the intercom, nor the formal tone she had used with June. It was quieter, softer. It was an attempt, June realized, at a mother's voice. "You have grown so much," Sumin did not answer. She just stared, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion. This was not the Iyama from the pictures on her tablet. That Iyama had a soft, round face and wore bright colors. This Iyama was sharp and wore gray and seemed to make the air around her feel cold. Hyejin's eyes flickered to June for a second, a silent question. He gave a tiny, almost angry nod. "Go on." She looked back at Sumin and produced a small, ornate box from a hidden pocket in her uniform. It was made of a dark, polished wood, inlaid with a silvery metal that swirled in a complex alien pattern. It was beautiful and strange, just like her. "This is for you," Hyejin said, holding the box out. "A gift." Sumin looked up at her father, seeking permission, seeking reassurance. June's heart felt like a heavy rock in his chest. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell Hyejin to take her alien gift and leave, but he looked at his daughter's hopeful, uncertain face and he couldn't. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice tight. Sumin took a small, hesitant step forward, then another. She stopped an arm's length away from her mother and reached out, taking the box. It was heavy for its size. She held it in both hands, looking down at the swirling patterns. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly it was almost a breath. "You are welcome," Hyejin replied. She stayed kneeling as if waiting for something more. A hug, a smile. But Sumin just stood there, holding the box, looking lost. The silence stretched, becoming thick and uncomfortable. June finally stepped back, breaking the tableau in the doorway. "You should come in," he said, the words tasting bitter. "You're letting the cold in." Hyejin rose to her feet in one smooth, effortless motion. She stepped across the threshold into the apartment. As she passed June, he felt a slight drop in temperature, a chill that clung to her like a perfume. It was a known side effect of the Draconi biological adjustments. Their internal body temperature ran cooler. But to June, it felt like she had brought the winter night inside with her. She stopped in the middle of the living room, her hands clasped neatly behind her back. She surveyed the room as if it were a location she was being briefed on. Her eyes moved from the small kitchen to the sofa to the Christmas tree, her expression unreadable. The warm, cozy light from the tree seemed to avoid her, leaving her in a pocket of shadow. "Can I take your coat?" June asked, the old habit of a host coming out automatically. "This is not a coat. It is my duty uniform. I will keep it on," she said, her tone formal again. "Right, of course." June shoved his hands into his pockets. "Would you like some tea? Or something to eat? I made some rice cakes. I have consumed the necessary nutrients for this cycle." "Thank you," she replied. June just stared at her. Necessary nutrients for this cycle. She sounded like a machine. He felt a fresh wave of anger. This was what she had chosen. This cold, efficient existence over the messy, warm life they had shared. Sumin had retreated to the sofa, the ornate box still held carefully in her lap. She was watching her mother, her little brow furrowed. Hyejin's gaze fell on the small pile of gifts under the tree. "You celebrate in the traditional way," she observed. "It's Christmas," June said, a hard edge in his voice. "What did you expect?" The Draconi do not observe solar-based sentimental holidays. Their timekeeping is based on galactic rotations. I had forgotten the specific details. Her eyes lingered on a small hand-knitted stocking hanging from a shelf. June had made it for Sumin's first Christmas. "Well, we remember the details here," he said. Another silence fell. Hyejin remained standing. June didn't invite her to sit. They were like two diplomats from warring nations trapped in a too-small room. Sumin, trying to be a good hostess like her appa had taught her, finally spoke. "Iyama?" She began, using the title carefully. "Do you live on a spaceship?" Hee-jin turned her attention to her daughter. I do. It is a Draconi diplomatic vessel. It is very large. Much larger than this building. Sumin's eyes widened. Wow, does it have a big window? Like ours? It has several viewports. They show the stars. It is mostly black. It is not like this. She gestured vaguely towards the window showing the snowy lit-up city. Do you have a bed on your ship? Sumin asked, her curiosity starting to overcome her shyness. I have a rest module. It is sufficient. Do you have a favorite food? My dietary intake is optimized for peak physical and mental performance. I do not have favorites. Each answer was like a small, precise hammer blow, nailing shut the coffin of the past. Jun remembered a woman who loved spicy tteokbokki, who would laugh with a mouthful of food, who had a secret stash of sweet chocolate in the back of the cupboard. That woman was gone. This person was a shell. Sumin seemed to be running out of questions. The answers she was getting were not the kind a 7-year-old knew how to talk to. She looked down at the box in her lap. Should I open it? She asked, looking at Jun. It's your gift, he said. You can if you want to. Sumin looked at Hee-jin for confirmation. Hee-jin gave a single slight nod. With careful fingers, Sumin found the small clasp on the box and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a sphere about the size of her fist. It was made of a crystal that seemed to hold a swirling, nebulous light inside it. Tiny points of silver and blue that drifted slowly in a deep, dark blue mist. It was breathtaking. What is it? Sumin whispered. It is a captured nebula fragment, Hee-jin explained, from the Cygnus loop. The light you see is thousands of years old. It is a piece of a star's death. Sumin carefully lifted the sphere. It was cool to the touch. The tiny lights inside swirled and danced, casting soft blue patterns on her face. It was the most amazing thing she had ever seen. But it was also strange and a little sad. A piece of a star's death. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't something to play with. It was a thing to look at and be quiet. It's very pretty, Sumin said politely. Thank you, Yama. It is a significant artifact. It will remind you of the scale of the universe beyond this world, Hee-jin said. Jun could stay quiet no longer. The anger that had been simmering inside him finally boiled over. The formal answers, the cold gift, her standing there like a visitor from another planet in the middle of their home. Why are you really here, Hee-jin? He asked, his voice low and rough. He took a step towards her. A sudden surge of maternal instinct? After 3 years? Or did the Concordat need a photo op? The Dragon Lady reconnects with her human past? Is that what this is? Hee-jin turned her head slowly to look at him. The calm, diplomatic mask on her face did not change, but her eyes. For a split second, the gold flecks in them seemed to burn brighter. He saw a flash of something there. Not anger, but pain. The pain of the woman he knew, buried deep under the layers of the person she had become. It is not like that, she said, her voice even, but with a new tension underneath. The air in the apartment was thick enough to choke on. Jun's question hung between them, sharp and accusing. Hee-jin's face was a mask, but the flicker in her eyes had been real. For a single second, the Dragon Lady had vanished, and the woman he knew had looked out, trapped and hurting. Sumin, sensing the storm, clutched the nebula sphere to her chest. The beautiful sad lights inside seemed to pulse in time with her quickening breath. It is not like that, Hee-jin repeated, her voice low. She turned her body fully to face Jun, her hands still clasped tightly behind her back. The formal posture was back, but it seemed tighter now, like a wire pulled too taut. Then what is it like? Jun pressed, his own hands clenched into fists at his sides. You walk in here on Christmas Eve. You bring her a piece of a dead star. You talk about duty uniforms and necessary nutrients. You don't look like her mother. You don't sound like her mother. So why are you here? Hee-jin's gaze drifted away from him, sweeping over the room again. But this time it wasn't a cold assessment. Her eyes lingered on the small details. A child's drawing of their family, 3 stick figures, one with long black hair stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. A worn-out stuffed rabbit sitting on the arm of the sofa. The pair of small red shoes placed neatly by the door. The negotiations with the Jovian Syndicate are tense, she began, her words careful and measured. They are a difficult people. They see discussion as a weakness. For 3 months, I have been in closed sessions. No windows, no outside communication, just the same gray walls, the same harsh lights, the same voices arguing in circles. She paused, and a strange thing happened. Her perfect posture wavered. It was just a slight slump of her shoulders, but on her, it looked like a mountain crumbling. The silence in those rooms is a heavy thing. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the silence before a storm. It presses on your mind. June said nothing. He just watched her, his anger momentarily frozen by this sudden, unexpected crack in her armor. A few days ago, she continued, her voice becoming quieter, almost a whisper, I was given a 12-hour leave cycle to rest, to regain my focus. Her eyes found the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling in a simple, cheerful pattern. I found myself. I could not stop thinking about this night, from before. She took a small, slow breath, a very human gesture that seemed out of place. I thought about the noise, the wrapping paper, the smell of the tree, the way the lights made patterns on the ceiling. Her eyes moved to Su Min, who was watching her, mesmerized. I thought about her laughter. It is a very specific sound. I had forgotten it, but in that silence I remembered. She looked back at June and the mask was gone. The pain he had glimpsed earlier was now plain on her face. It was raw and deep. I remembered June, and the memory was so loud. It was louder than all the arguments in that negotiation room. I had to come. I had to see if it was still real. The confession hung in the air, sucking all the anger out of the room and leaving behind a vast, aching sadness. June felt his own defenses tremble. He had built her up in his mind as a monster, a heartless creature who had traded her family for power. He had never imagined her in a silent, gray room, haunted by the ghost of a laughter she had left behind. Su Min, who had been listening to the strange, grown-up words, understood one thing clearly. Her mother was sad. Slowly, she slid off the sofa. Still holding the nebula sphere, she walked over to Hee-jin. She didn't hug her. She just stood close to her, looking up at her face. Iyama, she said softly, your room on the ship sounds scary. Hee-jin looked down at her daughter. The raw emotion on her face softened into something more gentle, more fragile. It is quiet, she said, correcting herself. I don't like quiet rooms either, Su Min announced. Sometimes at night when it's too quiet, Appa lets me have a little light on. Do you have a light? Hee-jin seemed to consider this. The control panels on my ship have many lights, but they are not like your light. You should get a small light, Su Min said with the simple wisdom of a child. A yellow one. It helps. A faint, almost invisible smile touched Hye-jin's lips. It was there and gone so fast June wondered if he had imagined it. But he hadn't. For a second, she had looked like herself. The tension in the room had changed. It was no longer a battle. It was a truce, fragile and uncertain. June unclenched his fists. The anger was still there, a dull ache, but it was now mixed with a confusing pity. Would you like to sit down? He asked, his voice less hostile. Hee-jin glanced at the sofa, then back at him. She gave a slow nod. Thank you. She moved to the sofa and sat on the very edge of the cushion, her back still straight but not as rigid as before. Su Min climbed up and sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. She placed the nebula sphere on the coffee table, its swirling lights now the centerpiece of the room. An awkward silence settled over them. The initial storm had passed, but no one knew what to do next. They were three strangers linked by a broken history. June, falling back on habit, went to the kitchen. I'm making hot chocolate, he said, not as an offer but as a statement. Su Min always has some on Christmas Eve. He busied himself with the kettle and the packets of powder, his back to the living room. He could hear the quiet sounds from behind him. Do you want to see my rabbit? Su Min asked her mother. His name is Bouncy. I would like to see him, Hye-jin replied, her voice still soft. June heard the rustle as Su Min fetched the stuffed animal. He poured the hot water into the mugs, the sweet smell of chocolate filling the kitchen. He's very old, Su Min explained. His ear is loose. Appa says he has character. Character's a valuable quality, Hye-jin said. It was still a formal answer, but it was trying. June carried 2 mugs of hot chocolate into the living room. He handed one to Su Min, who took it carefully. He hesitated, then held the second mug out to Hye-jin. She looked at it. The steam rose from the dark brown liquid. Small marshmallow floated on top. It was the most ordinary human thing in the world. I do not require, she started to say, then stopped. She looked from the mug to June's face. She slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers, cool against his, brushed his for a moment. The contact was electric. It was the first time they had touched in 3 years. She held the mug in both hands, not drinking, just feeling its warmth. She stared into it as if it were an artifact from a lost civilization. June sat in the armchair across from them, sipping his own chocolate. The three of them sat in the quiet living room, the snow falling outside the window, the Christmas lights blinking. It was not a happy scene. It was sad and complicated. But for the first time since she had arrived, it did not feel like a war. It felt like a wake, a mourning for the family that was, and a confusing, painful look at the people they had all become. Ye-Jin finally lifted the mug and took a small sip. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were shiny. "It is very sweet," she said, her voice thick. "That's the point," June said, and for the first time, there was no bite in his words. The hot chocolate was a bridge. For a few minutes, they were just 3 people in a room drinking something warm. Sumin chattered about Bouncy the rabbit and her friends at school. Ye-Jin listened, her mug held carefully in her lap, her eyes fixed on her daughter's face. She didn't offer many words, but her silence was no longer cold. It was attentive. June watched from his chair, the warmth of his own drink spreading through his chest. The sharp edges of his anger had been blunted by her confession. He saw the way she looked at Sumin, not with a diplomat's analysis, but with a hungry, aching love. It was a look he knew. It was the same way he looked at her when she was sleeping, memorizing her face. But the bridge was fragile. The mug of chocolate was finished. Sumin's stories ran out. The comfortable silence began to curdle back into awkwardness. The reality of the situation pressed in on them again. Ye-Jin was not here to stay. She was a visitor from another world, and her shuttle was waiting. Ye-Jin seemed to feel it too. The softness in her posture began to harden back into its trained rigidity. She placed the empty mug on the coffee table with a quiet, precise click. The sound was like a door closing. The flavor was agreeable, she said, her voice regaining its formal tone. "Thank you." June just nodded, his throat tight. She looked at Sumin, who was now yawning, the late hour and the emotional weight of the evening finally catching up to her. "It is getting late. You should prepare for sleep." Sumin's face fell. "But it's Christmas Eve. I get to stay up late." "Your mother is right," June said softly. "It's been a big night." The word mother felt strange in his mouth. For 3 years, he had not used it in this house. Sumin looked from one parent to the other, her lower lip trembling just a little. She could feel the moment slipping away. The magic, whatever it had been, was ending. Ye-Jin stood up. The movement was fluid and final. "I have taken enough of your time." Her eyes met June's, and he saw the wall going back up. The pain was being locked away, the professional mask sliding into place. The visit had been a failure. She had come looking for a ghost and found only the painful reality of the life she had abandoned. She had disrupted their peace and found none of her own. "I will take my leave," she said, her voice flat and empty. June stood as well. He wanted to say something. Stay, talk, explain. But the words were a tangled mess in his head. All he could see was the 3 years of silence. The birthdays missed. The lonely nights. The little girl asking for a mother who was never there. The hurt was a deep, old wound, and a single mug of hot chocolate could not heal it. He gave a short, stiff nod. Ye-Jin turned and walked towards the door. Her steps were slow and measured, each one a deliberate act. She did not look back at Sumin. It was as if she couldn't bear to. Sumin watched her go, her small body tense on the sofa. The reality of what was happening finally broke through her tired confusion. Her mother was here, and now her mother was leaving. Just like before, the woman in the gray uniform was walking away and the door was about to close, and it would be just her and Appa again in the quiet apartment. June watched Ye-Jin's back, a storm of conflicting emotions warring inside him. Relief that the painful visit was over. Anger that she was leaving so easily. A desperate, stupid hope that she would turn around. She reached the door. Her hand, cool and steady, rested on the frame, ready to leave their world and return to her own. It was then that Sumin moved. She slid off the sofa, her feet quiet on the floor. She took 2 small, hurried steps forward, her small hands clutching the fabric of her penguin pajamas. She looked at the retreating back of her mother, the tall, lonely figure in the doorway, the fear of the quiet rooms, the sadness in her mother's eyes, the finality of that closing door. It all crashed down on her at once. A small, desperate sound escaped her lips. It was not much more than a whisper, a breath shaped by a heartbreaking need. But in the absolute silence of the apartment, the two words were as clear and as shattering as glass. Yama, don't. The world stopped. Hyejin froze. Her whole body went perfectly still as if she had been turned to stone. Her hand resting on the doorframe trembled. It was a violent, uncontrollable shake that traveled up her arm. The rigid line of her shoulders collapsed. Her head bowed, as if the two small words were a physical weight she could no longer carry. Jun felt the air leave his lungs. He stared at his daughter, then at the broken figure in the doorway. Those two words, so simple, so direct, had done what all his anger and pain could not. They had shattered the dragon lady completely. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the soft, frantic puff of Sumin's breathing on the verge of tears. Then slowly, as if moving against a terrible gravity, Hyejin turned around. The mask was gone. Utterly destroyed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears that made the gold flecks swim in a sea of pain. She looked ancient and very, very young all at once. She looked at Sumin, and her expression was one of pure, undiluted agony. She wasn't an ambassador. She wasn't a dragon lady. She was a mother who had just been begged by her child not to leave. Without a word, her composure in ruins, she walked back into the room. Her steps were unsteady now, human. She didn't stop until she was in front of Sumin. Then her knees seemed to give way and she knelt on the floor, the elegant gray uniform pooling around her. She opened her arms. It was not a practiced, diplomatic gesture. It was a raw, desperate need. Sumin hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then with a small sob she rushed forward, throwing her arms around her mother's neck and burying her face in the cool, strange-smelling fabric. Hyejin's arms closed around her daughter. Holding her so tightly it seemed she would never let go. She buried her face in Sumin's hair, her shoulders shaking with silent, powerful sobs she could no longer contain. The cool air around her seemed to warm with the heat of her emotion. Jun stood rooted to the spot watching them. He saw Hyejin's hands trembling as they clutched at Sumin's back. He heard the ragged, broken sound of her breathing. He saw the way Sumin clung to her, as if she were a life raft in a stormy sea. The last of his anger melted away, leaving behind a vast and aching emptiness. He had been so wrong. She wasn't heartless. The pain had been there all along, buried so deep she had almost forgotten how to feel it. Those two words from their daughter had dug it up and set it free. The storm of emotion slowly quieted. The tight, desperate clutch of their embrace loosened. Sumin's small sobs faded into hiccups against her mother's shoulder. Hyejin's silent shaking stilled, though she kept her face buried in her daughter's hair for a long time, breathing in the simple child scent of her. It was a scent she had forgotten existed. When she finally pulled back, her face was raw and open. The tears had traced clean paths through the faint pearlescent sheen of her skin. She looked utterly human. She looked exhausted. She cupped Sumin's face in her hands, her thumbs gently wiping away the wetness on her daughter's cheeks. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Sumina, I am so sorry." Sumin just looked at her, her own eyes red and wide. She didn't understand the big words or the reasons. She only understood that her mother was here and she was holding her and she was sad. She reached up and put her own small hand on her mother's cheek. The skin was cool and smooth. Hyejin closed her eyes at the touch, a fresh wave of emotion passing over her face. She took a slow, shuddering breath and opened her eyes again. This time she looked over Sumin's head at Jun. He was still standing there, watching them. The anger was gone from his face. In its place was a deep, weary sadness and a dawning understanding. He had spent 3 years believing she felt nothing. Now he saw that she felt everything, and that was somehow worse. "I was wrong," Hyejin said to him, her gaze steady now, holding his. "I was wrong to stay away. I thought it would be easier for you both. To make a clean cut. I thought my new life and my old life could not exist in the same world." She shook her head, a slow, painful movement. "I was a fool." Jun didn't speak. He just listened. The words he had wanted to hear for so long were finally here, and they didn't bring victory. They just brought more pain. "I told myself I was doing important work," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength, a little of its old clarity, but without the coldness, "that I was helping to build bridges between worlds. But I burned the most important bridge of all." Her eyes drifted back to Sumin. I missed everything. The silence in the room was different now. It was not an empty silence or an angry one. It was a heavy, shared silence full of regret and loss and the faint, fragile beginnings of something new. Sumin, nestled in her mother's arms, yawned again, a huge, jaw-cracking yawn that was both comical and heartbreaking. The emotional whirlwind had drained her completely. June saw it. The night was over. The conversation, the real one that needed to happen between him and Hyejin, was too big for right now. It was a conversation for another time, without a tired 7-year-old between them. He took a step forward. It's time for bed, little space explorer, he said to Sumin, his voice gentle. Sumin immediately shook her head, clutching her mother's uniform. No, I don't want to. Hyejin looked down at her, then up at June. There was a silent question in her eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I will not leave, Hyejin said softly to Sumin. Not yet. I will be here when you wake up. Sumin looked at her, searching her face for the truth. Promise? Hyejin's breath caught. It was a word with weight. A word a diplomat avoided, but she did not hesitate. I promise. Satisfied and too tired to fight anymore, Sumin allowed her father to pick her up. She laid her head on his shoulder, her eyes already closing. June carried her to her small bedroom, tucked her into bed, and pulled the covers up to her chin. The small yellow nightlight by her bed cast a soft glow on her peaceful face. When he came back into the living room, Hyejin was still kneeling on the floor where he had left her. She had not moved. She was just staring at the spot where Sumin had been. She is asleep, June said quietly. Hyejin nodded slowly. She pushed herself to her feet, moving stiffly as if every bone in her body ached. She looked around the room at the tree, the gifts, the empty mugs. It was no longer a foreign location. It was a place where her daughter lived. It was a place where a piece of her own heart would always be. She walked over to the coffee table and picked up the nebula sphere. The captured starlight swirled inside, beautiful and distant. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back down gently. It is a lonely gift, she said, more to herself than to him. I see that now. June didn't answer. He just watched her. She turned to face him fully. I have to go back to my ship. File my report. There will be questions. She took a deep breath. But I will return tomorrow. In the daylight. If you will allow it, it was not a demand. It was a request. The power was his. June looked at this woman, his former wife, who was both a stranger and the most familiar person in the world. He thought of the empty years. He thought of the pain in her eyes. He thought of the 2 words that had changed everything. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time if it ever came at all. But it was a start. A first step onto a new uncertain path. The model starlifter, he said, his voice rough. He gestured to the last gift under the tree. It's almost finished. It has a lot of small pieces. It's complicated. He paused, meeting her gaze. She'd like you to see her put it together. It was an olive branch. A small one, but it was real. A real, gentle smile touched Hyejin's lips. It was tired and sad, but it was genuine. It was the smile he remembered. I would like that very much, she said. She walked to the door, but this time it was different. She was not running away. She was leaving with a purpose to return. She paused at the threshold and looked back at him. Good night, June. Good night, Hyejin. The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss. June stood alone in the quiet living room. The Christmas lights twinkled. The snow still fell outside the window, covering the city in a blanket of quiet peace. He looked at the closed door, then at the nebula sphere on the table. The tiny lights inside still swirled, a piece of a dead star. But in the warm, yellow light of the room, it no longer looked sad. It just looked beautiful. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There were 3 years of hurt to untangle. There was a galaxy of distance between their lives. But for the first time in a very long time, Kim June did not feel like a lone father. He felt like a man standing at the beginning of a long journey, but he was no longer walking alone. The path was uncertain, but it was there, and that was enough.